experience that he's pointing to, it's happened like 3 or 4 times where we've gone in and used 2 tools. This tool has been the tool that we've articulated what we do to the customer. But Charles Harris put together this other tool called StationCast, which actually has all the cartoons. It has Dragnet. It has Bullwinkle. It has Extreme Sports. He's got some movies in there. And what these are feature-length movies that run for 2 or 3 hours. And it's always impressive to have this running while you're talking in the meeting, full screen on the customer's computer. It's pretty powerful. And so the customer starts to begin, or the customer starts to understand how he's going to make his business work right there in that moment. And I can tell you that the customer he's talking about is NBC. I mean, they were flabbergasted when they saw that we were streaming full frame, full, Dragnet, some of the other stuff that we're doing, the extreme sports stuff. I mean, they would sit there just looking at television, and we couldn't even talk to them because they just wanted to watch, what was going on. So that's real important. Now, I'll go back to the other thing. Guys, if they don't have a broadband connection, I mean, if you call them up and say, I'd like to have a meeting with you, but you really need to have a broadband connection so we can kind of demonstrate the network, you really got to ask yourself, if somebody can't even hook up in a broadband way, why are we even talking to them? You really got to ask yourself that. I mean, if they can't hook up and let us demonstrate what we can do over the network, you got to really question if they have, what it takes to do business with us. So that's something I'll leave you with. And then the other thing is back to, you got to show the customers the assets. I would encourage you to go out and have, conversations as it relates to what we can do. But until you show them the asset, it's just going to be. It's going to be tough. People really need to see the kind of investment the company's made in this business. So that's another thing I encourage you to do. And you guys have probably heard about some of the things that we've been doing with some of the big Tier 1 customers. Anybody that comes up with someone and can put a management team together for one of these companies, you give me a call and we'll get them on a plane and we'll take them out to see the network. And I can guarantee anybody that's got the management team of one of these companies teed up ready to do a deal, but the only reason why you can't get the deal done is because they don't believe or they haven't got religion. Turn them loose on this guy right here, and it's game over. As he's demonstrated so many times in front of me, I'm just shocked at what we have. I'm a believer. So I guess with that, we're going to talk about deal structuring, and what we're going to do is hand that over to Frank and Steve, and Matt is going to be involved in that too to some degree. And talk a little bit about how we're going to put deals together, big deals together in the future. So thanks a lot.
My name's Frank Bay, and this is Steve Barth, and we're going to talk to you about the War Room and also kind of our outsourcing business model as a way to go after and get the systematic earnings that Jeff Skilling referred to that we're going to need in order to get this thing launched. Of course, a lot of things are important, but I'm not sure anything's more important than getting the name right. We talked about War Room. Steve ran the War Room over at EES. Some people thought that was too militaristic, so we talked about the Pacification Center, but that didn't seem to get after it. We talked about a knowledge pooling point and a strategic business decision center, but I think David Cox gave us our best name, the Muleshoe Fire Department. We'll have to catch up on that, Ted. Requires graphics and everything, but it's not multicast. In any event, we're going to try to do our best. Well, Dave's back. We've renamed our team the Muleshoe Fire Department. Now the question is, are we the Muleshoe Fire Department before the brakes have been fixed or after? Which probably gets us pretty good segue into what we're talking about. This was the donut that John Bloomer put up that he and John Griebling and McKinsey have been working on. And I think it kind of gets at the nub of the idea of what we're talking about in the War Room. In the middle is the shareholder value or the value concept, and what it requires is iteration around the strategic business planning, the development, which is Bloomer's group, and the customer life cycle, which is Griebling's group. All those things, are not simple and linear and easier. They all kind of go both directions. And implicit in that is a whole host of issues for the people in this room, which is how do we sell what we sell? What is it that we sell? What's the price it ought to be sold at? Once we sell it, is it really going to happen? And Steve and I and people that we've kind of been putting together in our team have been spending several weeks going out to Portland and other places, really kind of asking questions and getting people's feedback, because the worst thing you can do is have an idea what you think is needed and then, what you realize later it's not. In fact, the reaction has been just the opposite. I think there's a lot of people that say, yeah, we could use the kind of support that the War Room is interested in putting together, and that's what our presentation is about, is how we go about and execute on that. And to me, just to kind of jump to the conclusion here, I think the idea and kind of the agreement that it needs to be done is so strong that my biggest concern is that we not get the people in and execute so that people realize that this can be done. This is kind of hard to read, but I think it kind of gets at the concept, which is what we want to focus on is kind of developing a place. And I guess I ought to back up. The War Room's kind of an idea, and then it's also going to be a physical place. The physical place is on 44 right outside of David Cox's office, and we're going to set up Wednesday morning kind of our first walkthrough and getting people at the table. The idea is, how do you take what Jeff Skilling talked about today, which is all that intellectual capital, all that energy, all that culture, and then specific ideas that we do better than everybody else, the finance, the capital, the risk management, the credit risk, all the other applications that we can bring to bear. And how do you marry that up with what is just some unbelievable technology and thinking that Yeager and others have put together out in Portland? And our view is that the War Room and the idea will become kind of a clearinghouse or a focal point to bring some of these ideas for debate or discussion. Or if somebody's got a terrific vertical idea or somebody had a terrific sales call that makes sense, how do you proliferate that out so you can get the systematic earnings? I think what we realize when you have some pretty big financial targets, which are going to be laid on us, is that we're going to have to go out and make sure that we're getting all the corn off every field, not just kind of picking the ones that happen to be there in front of us. So if that's the idea, some of the concepts that we're throwing out is how you can develop a support group or a place to go get solid economic analysis around value creation, organizational understanding and clarity around the products, the strategies, and the capabilities, focused team efforts to bring the best product to the client, and kind of a disciplined and complete pricing discussion. This was McKinsey's attempt to kind of go at what we're talking about. I think we'd change this a little bit in light of yesterday's discussion, would make the birds elephants. And I'm not so sure that the first slide wouldn't be a lot of shotguns and just one bird. But in any event, I think it kind of gets at the concept. The other problem is that clearly Brian Begley is not a hunter because he don't take a high-power scope rifle after a bird, but small details. We'll work on the technology there too. This is probably worth spending a few minutes on, or a few seconds. The mission is what we just talked about. Provide the analytical research and economic financial analysis, serve as a central warehouse and knowledge center for the business activities, facilitate creation and work on cross-functional business ideas. That's kind of the outsourcing idea that we're talking about. Serve as a filtering and evaluation process for new business ideas. Talking with Matt Harris about his participation on the War Room as you go out and try to identify new verticals. Over time, is it just a series of new verticals you go after, or do you realize that it's some horizontals that you can get after? And I think that's where you leverage Enron's talent base and the skills that we have here in Houston with the product, so you can kind of see how you get the biggest bang. And Steve has a terrific slide on that. And finally, to evaluate and manage risk exposure. And we have the risk management group and what they're doing on the trading side, as well as kind of just the general risk of going out and promising something to a customer and not being able to deliver. That's a pretty big issue. Turn it over to you, Steve.
Okay. Part of my history is I was involved with EES for a number of years, dating back to the time when EES was just getting started. And there are some uncanny resemblances to the processes that were needed at EES relative to what we need here today, or what it appears we need at ECI. And that is that there are some things that are major differentiators about EES and ECI from a lot of the other parts of Enron, which I'm sure, as many people in Portland have experienced, that's not always an easy message to convey. The differences between wholesale transactions that essentially are contracted for through financial and commodity tools versus those things that are purely physical in nature, where you actually have to build a network, you have to maintain a network, you have to provide the 5 nines, all those things that are very physical in nature. Also, the customer service issues, a lot of things that are really related to dealing with a lot of end users. And so that was some of the similarities that we saw early on. EES frankly struggled with a lot of that, trying to figure out how you got comfortable and came to grips with the various different elements of the physical side of the business. And in the EES world, it was how do you go from supplying simply commodity to supplying commodity full requirements delivery to the end user so that they could buy power from you 24/7 rather than on a 6x16 load or something that was a wholesale commodity that was a take or pay component. Or the other things that we had to come to grips with were metering and billing, horrendous customer service issues for us. How did you deploy meters in the field? How did you get them done? A lot of the same kind of things that you're looking at from the standpoint of how you procure various different network functionalities and how do you manage the billing systems and so forth. So in kind of my layman's exploration of the business, we went back and said, well, what was it that EES did? And what EES did was it took a view of the world that said that every component of the business model and every component of delivery was essentially a risk element of the process. And so we went back, and there's a constantly evolving process, not only across at EES but across Enron as a whole, where we identify various different risk components of delivery or of the value proposition that we're providing, and we put those into a book. And we start to manage those and look at the various elements that make up the risks, the risk mitigants, and our exposure to those risks and risk mitigants, and start to take a position about what the true cost of that particular component of delivery is. So if you look at this is once again pretty small, I'm sure, from the back of the room, but there are some things that are important color codes here, and that is that if you see at the very top it says customer, and immediately below that it says sales and origination, which is, of course, well, we currently have vertical marketplaces, vertical groups that are out selling, but we also have some people in Houston who have basically been pioneering origination functions in the world, just trying to test the waters and see what else is out there. The second component below that then is structuring. And structuring is the place where we see ultimately all the economics coming together and being completed to produce an output that is a company-wide recognized output that recognizes the net present value of that sale based upon all the different risk elements that have been rolled up into that. The two bars below that immediately you see we have labeled offer margin and current market margin, or what we call mid margin. And those line up down below with the green layer that's underneath the blue boxes, and I'll explain that in just a second. But if you look at the blue boxes, you see that in the EES model we have capital, we have commodity, which is made up of natural gas and electricity, we have hardware, which is chillers and boilers and so forth. You have operations and maintenance, applications such as information systems, and then construction and operation, and then new services. All of those things go into the output of an EES sale. And the way we add those things up are we have mid-margin and offer margin. The mid-margin is essentially the value that's created from an individual delivery group in the company selling their product into the deal. And probably the best example I can give to that is, as we heard from John Bloomer today, ultimately he will probably, I envision that Bloomer will bid back into the structuring, through the structuring group, a cost of an application. And so if you're going to serve XYZ Corporation and you're going to use the MediaCast product, there's going to be a cost component that's going to go in there that's going to reflect the R&D component, the development component of that particular product. Maybe it's the tweaking that makes it work, but he's going to have a price back to that deal. On top of that margin, which that would be the mid-margin. So in other words, that's how much there's margin in there for Bloomer's group that says that's how much we're going to take out of this for having supplied that product. On top of that is the premium that we can charge as a deal, essentially, which is the offer margin, which is the delta between what the mid-margin is and the cost that we're actually going to sell it to the customer. So those are the two basic margin creation components, and I think these are standard across Enron, that those are terms and terminologies that you'll hear used as we get more and more and more into defining the various risk components of the business. So that lines up with the green elements down below. The other elements that you see down below that are lined up with yellow are what we've termed future efficiency margin and customer ownership and optionality margin. And that really comes with the concept that whether it's hardware or whether it's capital, or whether it's applications, that there's future margin value that we don't know just this minute. But as we take a risk-managed view of the world, we can take an estimate that we're going to improve our buying capabilities, or we're going to improve our service levels, and that in turn is going to create more margin inherently in the process. And so what we get to do is we get to take another look, and ultimately this is the real value of the risk management process, because you get to take a risk-managed view of every component, and you're no longer basing it upon the cost of that service today, but you're basing it upon a risk-managed portfolio that says the future costs are going to be something less than what we're charging today, and therefore that gets to be imputed in the model. The other piece of it is the ownership and optionality component, which is probably one of the biggest unknowns about this business yet to date, is what will be the future optionality value. But in each component, in each deal, we're going to certainly be taking a look at how do we create the optionality that we need to serve a customer in the future and bring them additional expanded services. So that's just a snapshot of the risk management function. Now, as we look to ECI, we've broken it down into the three elements that I think are now common to the company. One is bandwidth, trading and intermediation. Then there's the EIN, or the e-powered network, and then there are applications. And in each one of these, we estimate that there are going to be both physical and financial services underlying. The other piece that we're looking at is what we call the market interface, which is everything from what are the third-party applications that could be incorporated? What are the other revenue streams that could be derived? Do we play a role in the advertising piece? How do we get value at the maximum level from each deal that we do? And this is, I think, one of the real advantages of looking at it from the war room perspective is, as Jeff described this morning, we can start to look to the world and say, can we combine a solution that does more than just it's more than just the sum of the parts. It's added value from all those sums being brought together and producing an output, and possibly even selling that output via a different measurement metric. So that instead of selling just the LAN and just the service or just the circuit, I think you've already converted the measurement metric to be the megabits per second, which is a different metric than what the industry was buying from before. So this is how it looks then at ECI. These are the basic risk functions that we see today, and certainly this is once again a layman's view, but I think we'll continue to refine this. And one of the functions of the war room is, as we lay this thing out, we're going to start dissecting each deal that comes in, and we're going to take a look at it and say, what are the various different components of this deal, and do we currently have a risk management function in place to take care of that? So currently it's capital. Certainly there's capital involved, as you've heard today. Every deal we're doing, we think that the leverage and the use of capital from Enron is going to make a significant difference. There's the commodity of the bandwidth, or the bandwidth and intermediation. There's the hardware side of it. We're employing state-of-the-art equipment. We're using hardware. But part of the risk management function may be that we take a view of 1,000-unit pricing instead of single-unit pricing as we start to cost out deals. Or we go out and we think that the risk book can negotiate a more efficient purchasing program. Those are the kinds of risk elements that we think, those are the risk mitigants that we can bring. Operations, pooling and accounting, applications, and then network construction and operation. One thing that I think is really important is to understand that a lot of the economics of deals that we see now, especially something that's a short-term deal, if it's a 12-month to 24-month deal or even a 36-month deal, if we've based the revenues or the NPVs of that deal with the idea that we're going to be flowing or streaming media in 90 days from the time we sign that contract, and we don't get them up for 180 days instead of 90 days, we could have lost the very front end of that deal and lost a lot of the NPV value for the entire transaction. So it's really important, as we start to get a grip on this, we're going to have to know who's responsible for the execution, and we're going to run a book on that execution. And then we're going to know for sure that if they committed to having it done in 90 days, if it's not done in 90 days, then the book gets hit for that cost. And so those are the kinds of risk components and risk management techniques that Enron has used historically that we want to start to apply to this business to create more value and more ability for us to serve. The last piece is then kind of what are the war room functions and interfaces. Once again, I know from the back of the room this is tough to see, but we're going to create cross-functional deal teams. We've got a whole bunch of people that we're starting to assemble that are made up of kind of three operational groups. One, origination people that will be working to help identify new opportunities and working in conjunction with the existing sales team. Secondly, we'll have kind of what I would call an operational staff, which are people that will be actually involved in helping to construct the solutions and working the various different elements of the deal. And then finally, kind of a war room administrative staff that will look and try to work with the various different parts of the company that need to be brought in. And the war room is going to be very fluid. I mean, as Frank said, it's a concept, but it's also a place. But the staff will never be the same on any given deal. We may have 5 different people involved in one deal and 10 people in another deal, and you'll have a very fluid environment where people will be tasked based upon their expertise and based upon the requirements of that particular transaction. It's structuring development. You just heard what we talked about from the standpoint of structuring, but it'll be identifying what the risk components are and how do we bring those into a structuring model. We are not the structurers. We're simply going to facilitate the identification of the need. Business and development for new products, product and service pricing and strategy, and that's probably the biggest part of it, is trying to help to develop the strategy for the future. The rest of this I think we've covered already, but this is the idea is that it's a place for us to gather, identify the problems of or the needs of the organization, the opportunities of the deal, and then surface that amongst the various different delivery groups. Frank? Oh, I'm sorry, that's the one. Okay. I'm sorry, one more slide and then I'll get out of the way. This is the view. If you take the yellow box right now, in terms of what we think is the total value of a structured transaction, currently we think we're capturing the yellow box only. And the idea here is that through War Room and the development of the proper risk management tools and the proper structuring, that we can develop these other inherent opportunities that are in the deal that we're not capturing yet. And that's no one's fault. It's just a statement of the development of the organization and where we are in the life cycle of the maturity of this company. But ultimately, we view the band at the far right-hand side as the band of opportunity that exists from a total margin perspective on a given deal.
Yeah, and I would just comment back on that slide that that's a Jeff Skilling slide. I mean, that's what he's saying is with Enron, our ability to bring in what we've done in the gas and electric side, to disaggregate industries, to see where value is, to move quickly, and to bring a lot of horsepower there. And that's a pretty cool slide. The last slide is really kind of an organizational template. I think really what this slide says is that things are going to change. This is going to be a leg-in process. We're going to sit down Wednesday morning and get some people at the table. Probably the first thing we're going to figure out is we don't have nearly the right people at the table, or if we do figure out which the right organizations are, how do you staff that in a way so that it becomes a solution center, or at least a place that can meet quickly enough to talk about the ideas and issues as opposed to a backlog. I think one of our real concerns and fears is that somehow this is seen as a hurdle, somehow this is seen as a way to tell you to not do a deal, somehow this is seen as a way to keep the verticals that are going out there right now when we're making money to slow those down or stop them. Not that at all, just the opposite. But I think the ability to kind of go from a startup to a high-growth company needs that kind of coordination in order for us to kind of get those revenues. So we just threw this out as some different areas where we're going to have either risk buckets or people who need to be involved. And Christina was chatting briefly about getting the law group involved and some of the others, so that we have a place where we can really almost on a real-time basis get these answers up. And the last thing that it's not, quite frankly, is a decision center. We're not going to sit there and dictate policy. That's what senior management's about. And the first slide about what's your strategic business equation? There's mind share or reach, and then there's revenue. And there's all sorts of trade-offs between those. And I think this will be a place where we can get data points and discover different facts so that senior management can make some decisions about that. Or to John Bloomer and John Griebling's point, if this is a service industry that requires 5 nines in terms of quality, Enron traditionally is more of a deal-making organization. So how do you bring those together? I don't know if we...
One of the main reasons why we started to look at this deal team or this war room concept is that when I go out on the road and I want to sell something, I don't want to deal with any of the details after the sale, right? So we got these two guys to take care of that. So really what we want to do is to create systematic ways for people to make money. Everything that I've been involved with in the last several years is that if there wasn't a systematic way for the Dave Coxes, the Mitch Olsons, and the Ted Seitz of the world to go and make money, we never made any money. So these guys are going to figure that out, and we're going to get on with it. And I don't know that they mentioned, but Matt's going to be involved with this effort as well, and making sure that we define the new verticals and get our hands around doing that going forward. So that's pretty exciting. The next speaker, I asked to come kind of at the last minute, but one of the problems that April has had in her business is, you know, a lot of these big media companies haven't quite figured out how to package up their products and sell them using streaming media. A lot of customers that we're talking to don't understand how they're going to use the products and services that we offer, which is really a wholesale business. I mean, we're offering wholesale streams, or sometimes streams where we're selling to an end user. But if you don't really have a plan, or you don't know what you're going to do with these streams, it's very difficult to get a sale off. Terry McFadden is with imshow.com, which is one of our customers that you know, has a pretty good track record with us, and actually we've kind of struggled to get some things done for him, but we're getting better at it. But one of the things that we want to do is have Mr. McFadden talk a little bit about how we can present the customer with a way to use streams. And they've got a whole bunch of products and services that they kind of embed into the streams, which provides a better, more compelling story to tell the customer. And IMSHA is one of our big, big customers, and we really want to work with them. So again, you know, as we're out there trying to sell stuff, let's not just sell wholesale streams to a media company. And I'm looking for Rob House. Rob, are you out here somewhere? Well, you know, we were talking about when we go see Warner Brothers and they haven't quite cooked up a strategy around their streaming media product, I mean, clearly there's an opportunity for IMSHOW to provide them with some of the polling services, the CEO talks, you know, or the sales meetings or stuff like that, where we can begin to at least open a commercial relationship up with a customer by employing some of the technology that these guys have. So with that, I'll let Terry come on up and tell you a little bit about what they do.